On June 28, 1976, Mark Fidrych walked onto the mound at Tiger Stadium with the New York Yankees waiting in the other dugout and 47,855 people filling the seats. The game was being carried across the country on ABC's Monday Night Baseball. In the broadcast booth, Bob Prince, Warner Wolf, and Bob Uecker watched the young Detroit pitcher do things most pitchers did not do. Fidrych talked to the ball. He aimed it like a dart. After every out, he circled the mound, strutting in his own peculiar rhythm, then crouched down to repair the dirt with his hands. And somehow, the stranger the scene became, the better he pitched. Fidrych threw a complete game, beat the Yankees 5-1, and finished in only 1 hour and 51 minutes. When the final out was recorded, the fans did not immediately head for the exits. They waited. They wanted the pitcher back. Eventually, the Bird emerged from the dugout and tipped his cap. For one night, Detroit belonged completely to a 21-year-old rookie who had been a 10th-round draft pick less than 2 years earlier. But the remarkable part of the story was not simply that Mark Fidrych became a national celebrity. It was that beneath the talking, the mound manicuring, and the bounding strides was a pitcher having one of the best seasons in baseball. And then, just 4 years later, his major league career would be over. His last appearance came in Toronto on October 1st, 1980.
He pitched 5 innings, allowed 4 earned runs, and earned the win in an 11-7 Detroit victory. It was an official ending, but it did not feel like an ending worthy of the summer that had made him famous. To understand what happened to Mark Fidrych, you have to go back to the moment before the crowds, before the magazine covers, and before baseball had decided what to make of him. Detroit selected him in the 10th round of the 1974 amateur draft out of Worcester Academy in Massachusetts. Fidrych later joked that when he received the phone call telling him he had been drafted, he thought he might have been drafted into the armed services. He had not expected a major league organization to be calling. That detail says something about the distance between the player he was and the phenomenon he would become. Fidrych came into professional baseball without the kind of advance attention that surrounds a top draft pick. He was a lanky, 6'3" right-hander from Northborough, Massachusetts, signed by the Tigers and sent into the minor leagues to find out how far his arm could take him. At Lakeland, one of his coaches gave him a nickname, the Bird, because he looked like Big Bird from Sesame Street. At the time, it was just a minor league comparison. Nobody could have known that the name would soon appear on national magazine covers, in television commercials, and in the chants of thousands of Detroit fans.
Fidrych reached the Tigers in the spring of 1976 and made the roster. But his arrival was quiet. He made his major league debut on April 20th, pitching only 1 inning against Oakland. Through the middle of May, he had thrown just that single inning. Then, on May 15th, Detroit gave him the ball against the Cleveland Indians. Bruce Kim was behind the plate, the same catcher who had been Fidrych's battery mate at AAA Evansville the year before. That familiar relationship mattered in a moment when nearly everything else was changing. The rookie pitcher was making his first major league start, and the catcher knew what it felt like to work with him before the big league audience had formed an opinion. Fidrych held Cleveland hitless through 6 innings. Around the mound, he was already behaving unlike anyone else. After outs, he would walk in a circle. He talked to the ball as if it needed instructions. He patted down the dirt and fixed the cleat marks. When the grounds crew tried to repair the mound during the 6th inning, Fidrych refused to let them alter it. The performance was becoming a conversation between the pitcher and the field beneath him. By the end of the afternoon, Fidrych had completed a 2-hit, 2-1 victory with 1 walk and 5 strikeouts. The numbers were impressive, but the way he occupied the mound made the game feel larger than a normal rookie debut. Detroit Free Press writer Jim Hawkins watched the scene and wrote, "He really is something to behold."
Indians hitter Rico Carty had another interpretation.
He thought Fidrych was trying to hypnotize the opposing lineup. Those reactions captured the uncertainty around him. Was the behavior a show? Was it a ritual? Was it a way to concentrate? Nobody needed to settle the question yet, because the results were already forcing everyone to pay attention. The first start had given Detroit something more valuable than a novelty. It had given the Tigers a pitcher who could control a game and make the mound feel like a place only he understood. A few days later, Fidrych took that new identity to Fenway Park. On May 25, 2 busloads of supporters traveled from his hometown of Northborough to Boston. The young pitcher was back in Massachusetts, surrounded by people who knew where he came from, while the Red Sox offered the kind of stage that could make a new player feel very small. Fenway was full, loud, and built for history. Fidrych allowed 2 earned runs in 8 innings, both coming on a 2-run home run by Carl Yastrzemski. But Luis Tiant shut out the Tigers, and Fidrych took his first major league loss. The loss did not stop the story. In some ways, it made the next part more compelling. Fidrych had now shown he could win in Detroit and hold his own in Boston. The question was whether the first start had been an isolated burst or the beginning of something that could keep growing. Detroit would not have to wait long for the answer.
On May 31st, Fidrych pitched an 11-inning complete-game victory over Milwaukee. 5 days later, in Arlington, Texas, he threw another 11-inning complete game, this time beating the Rangers. The workload was part of the era, but it was also part of Fidrych's particular authority. He was not overpowering hitters with a parade of strikeouts. His strikeout rates were below the league average throughout his career. He succeeded through exceptional control, late movement, keeping the ball down, and forcing opponents into ground balls. He also kept the ball in the park. Across his major league career, he allowed only 23 home runs in 412 1/3 innings. He gave hitters something they could put in play and made it difficult for them to put it anywhere useful. By June, the wins were becoming regular, the crowds were growing, and the strange figure on the mound was beginning to feel like Detroit's own. But the city had not yet seen the night when the bird would become a national story. On June 11, Fidrych returned to Tiger Stadium and beat the California Angels 4-3 in front of 36,377 people. 8 days later, he beat Kansas City by the same score before another Detroit crowd. At Fenway Park on June 24th, his family and friends were in the stands. Fidrych gave up back-to-back home runs to Fred Lynn and Carl Yastrzemski, but still won his 6th consecutive start. The games were beginning to feel less like appearances and more like appointments. People wanted to see what he would do next, what he would say to the ball, whether he would circle the mound after another out, whether he would emerge from the dugout after the final pitch. Then came June 28. The Yankees were in Detroit. ABC was broadcasting nationally, and Tiger Stadium held 47,855 people. The crowd had come to see the rookie, but by then, Fidrych was giving them something beyond the ordinary promise of a young pitcher. He had made the mound itself part of the event. He crouched in the dirt and repaired the cleat marks. He talked to the baseball between pitches. After outs, he walked around the mound with those long, loose strides, then turned his attention back to the next hitter. The Yankees had to stand in and face him, while the pitcher seemed to be conducting a private conversation with the field. The game moved quickly. Fidrych threw a complete game. Detroit won 5-1, and the entire contest lasted only an hour and 51 minutes. When the final out was over, the crowd did not disperse. The stadium stayed alive, waiting for the rookie to appear. The Tigers had won, but the fans wanted one more moment from the player who had turned a baseball start into a shared ritual. Fidrych came out of the dugout and tipped his cap. If you watched baseball in the 1970s, you remember how unusual that was. A curtain call belonged more to a performer after a show than to a starting pitcher after a regular season game. But in Detroit, the audience had begun to treat each Fidrych start as its own kind of performance, and Fidrych answered them in the only way he seemed to know, by returning to the field as himself. The national broadcast changed the scale of his fame. Before that night, the bird belonged primarily to Detroit. After it, the rest of baseball wanted to see him too. 3 nights later, on July 3rd, a sellout crowd of 51,641 filled Tiger Stadium to watch Fidrych face Baltimore. He shut out the Orioles 4-0, improved to 9-1 in 10 starts, and lowered his ERA to 1.85. The numbers were becoming difficult to dismiss. He was not merely winning games while entertaining people, he was controlling them. On July 9th, he faced Kansas City before another sellout, this one 51,041. Fidrych held the Royals to 1 run over 9 innings, but Dennis Leonard shut out Detroit, and the Tigers lost 1-0. Still, the crowd refused to leave until Fidrych came back out for another curtain call. That was the moment the relationship became unmistakable. The applause was no longer dependent on a victory. Detroit fans had attached themselves to the way he competed, to the feeling that a Fidrych game belonged to them, even when the final score went the other way. His season had now reached the All-Star break, and the American League named him to the team. On July 13th, at Veterans Stadium in Philadelphia, Fidrych became only the second rookie in American League history to start an All-Star game.
The spotlight was larger than anything he had faced in Detroit. He allowed 2 earned runs in the first inning, none in the second, and took the loss. But even an imperfect All-Star appearance could not erase what had already happened. In a matter of weeks, an unheralded rookie had become the league's most recognizable pitcher. Just 3 days later, Fidrych beat Oakland 1-0 for his 10th victory. 4 days after that, in Minnesota, the Twins released 13 homing pigeons on the mound before the game. Fidrych believed they were trying to disrupt his concentration. He responded by throwing another complete game, beating the Twins 8-3 and improving his record to 11-2. The attention could be playful, but it also followed him everywhere. On July 24, he struggled against Texas, surrendering 4 earned runs and leaving after 4 1/3 innings. John Hiller earned the victory in long relief. After the game, Fidrych appeared on live television. During the interview, he used profanity, then immediately apologized. He later recalled explaining that he was not about to cry, he had simply been expressing what he felt. The next day, he received a telegram informing him that Commissioner Bowie Kuhn had fined him $250. It was a prank from his teammates. That small clubhouse joke belonged to a season growing larger by the day.
Fidrych was on television, on magazine covers, and in conversations far beyond Detroit. Yet inside the Tigers clubhouse, he was still a teammate who could be teased. He continued to pitch deep into games. He threw consecutive 6-hit complete games on July 29 and August 7, winning one and losing the other. On August 11, he beat the Rangers and Gaylord Perry. 6 days later, before 51,822 fans, he beat Frank Tanana and the Minnesota Twins 3-2 to reach 14-4. On August 25, he held the Chicago White Sox to 5 hits in a 3-1 victory at Tiger Stadium. The game lasted only 108 minutes. By the end of the season, he had lost 3 straight decisions between August 29 and September 17, but he recovered to beat Cleveland twice and finish with his 19th win against Milwaukee on September 28. The final line was extraordinary. Fidrych went 19-9, led the majors with a 2.34 ERA, led the American League with 24 complete games, and threw 4 shutouts. His adjusted ERA ranked first in the league as well, measuring his performance against the offensive environment of the time. He won the American League Rookie of the Year award, was named Tiger of the Year by Detroit baseball writers, finished second in the Cy Young voting behind Jim Palmer, and received enough MVP support to finish 11th. And there was another number that explained what he meant to Detroit. In Fidrych's 18 home starts, the Tigers averaged 33,649 fans. In games when he did not start, Detroit averaged 13,843.
The difference was more than a statistic. It was the sound of people arriving early, waiting through the week, and refusing to leave until the bird had acknowledged them. His success generated an estimated more than $1 million in additional attendance around the league in 1976, even though he was still operating on the scale of a young player's salary. He had exceptional control, late movement, and a low home run rate. He also had a personality that made every pitch feel visible. That combination made him famous. It also created a difficult future. Baseball had discovered a player who seemed impossible to separate from the energy of the mound. The next question was whether his body could keep carrying the role. During spring training in 1977, Fidrych injured his knee while fooling around and shagging fly balls in the outfield. It was a strange interruption to a career that had seemed so carefully organized around the next start. He returned on May 27, and for a while, the old story appeared ready to resume. In his first 8 starts, Fidrych went 6-2 with a 1.83 ERA. The crowd still knew what they were waiting for. The mound was still there. The rituals were still there. The pitcher who had made 1976 feel like an ongoing event appeared to have survived the first setback. Then came July 4th, 1977, in Detroit against the Baltimore Orioles. Fidrych pitched into the game and faced Eddie Murray.
After Murray hit a 2-run home run, Fidrych was removed after 5 2/3 innings. The Orioles scored 6 runs in the inning and won 6-4, but the decisive moment had already occurred inside Fidrych's arm. In his own words, it had gone dead. At the time, the injury was not properly diagnosed. The actual problem was a torn rotator cuff, but nobody would identify it until 1985. That delay changed the shape of everything that followed. Fidrych made 2 more starts before going on the disabled list for the rest of 1977. He finished 6-4 with a 2.89 ERA and had to decline another All-Star invitation because of the injury. The invitation carried a painful implication. He was still being recognized as one of the American League's most important players, but he could not take the field. A few weeks earlier, he had looked like the sport's most compelling young pitcher. Now the team, the fans, and Fidrych himself were left with an injury that could be felt but not fully explained. He returned for only 3 games in 1978. He won 2, including an opening day victory, and those flashes were enough to keep the possibility of a comeback alive. That is how the next several years unfolded. A brief return, a little evidence, another interruption, and the hope that the next appearance might restore the player everyone remembered. On August 12, 1980, 48,361 fans came to Tiger Stadium for what became another comeback attempt. They were not simply watching a pitcher try to win a game. They were revisiting the summer when he had made the whole city wait for him after the final out. The crowd could supply the memory. It could not supply the damaged shoulder. Fidrych's last major league appearance came on October 1st, 1980, in Toronto. He pitched 5 innings, gave up 4 earned runs, and earned the win in an 11-7 Tigers victory televised in Detroit. There was no final curtain call like the one against the Yankees. No single scene could restore the scale of 1976. The last game arrived quietly, almost accidentally, inside a season that had already moved on. Detroit released Fidrych after the 1981 season. In 1982, he signed with the Boston Red Sox and continued with one of their minor league teams. The effort to remain a professional pitcher continued, but the torn rotator cuff was still undiagnosed and untreated.
By age 29, Fidrych was forced to retire. In 1985, he went to sports medicine specialist James Andrews. Andrews discovered the torn rotator cuff and operated on it. The diagnosis finally explained what had happened, but it came after years of damage. The surgery could repair the shoulder. It could not restore the professional career that might have followed a timely diagnosis. That is the hardest part of Fidrych's baseball story. The career did not end because the 1976 season was exposed as a fluke. It ended after he had already shown that he could still pitch at that level in 1977, and after the injury to his arm had been allowed to remain hidden.
The question is not whether Mark Fidrych was good enough. His 1976 season answered that. The question is how much more there might have been. After baseball, Fidrych returned to Northborough. He married Anne in 1986, and the two lived with their daughter Jessica on a 107-acre farm. His work was practical and physical. He fixed up the farmhouse, hauled gravel and asphalt in a 10-wheel truck, and helped on weekends at his mother-in-law's business, Chet's Diner, on Route 20. Later, the diner was operated by Jessica. He also went to the local baseball field to help teach and play ball with children. There was a natural temptation to treat that life as an afterword to the real story, as if the important part had ended when the shoulder did. But the details point somewhere else. Fidrych did not disappear into a memory of 1976. He worked, raised a family, stayed connected to the game, and remained part of the place he had come from. In a 1998 interview, when asked whom he would invite to dinner if he could invite anyone in the world, he chose his former Tigers teammate, Mickey Stanley, explaining that Stanley had never been to his house. It was a small answer, but it carried the scale of his relationships. Fame had brought Fidrych magazine covers, television appearances, commercials, and people asking to represent him. The connection he wanted to celebrate was still a teammate coming to dinner. The baseball world recognized him in its own way. Fidrych was inducted into the Baseball Reliquary's Shrine of the Eternals in 2002, a fitting honor for a player whose place in the sport could not be measured by career totals alone. He had played only 5 major league seasons. He never won a World Series. His career statistics were limited because his career itself was limited. But for one season, he led all of baseball in ERA. He completed 24 games. He drew crowds that nearly doubled the Tigers' attendance on the days he did not pitch. He made a mound ritual visible to an entire country and gave Detroit fans a reason to stay in their seats after the game had technically ended. Then, on April 13th, 2009, Mark Fidrych died at his home in Northborough. A family friend found him beneath his 10-wheel dump truck at about 2:30 in the afternoon. Fidrych appeared to have been working on the vehicle before the start of the road-building season. Authorities determined that he had suffocated after his clothing became entangled with a spinning power takeoff shaft. The Massachusetts medical examiner ruled the death an accident. The details were tragic and matter-of-fact, rooted in the working life he had built after baseball. Thousands attended the memorial service. 2 days after his death, the Tigers honored him at Comerica Park with a moment of silence and a video tribute. In June, his daughter Jessica came onto the field before a Tigers game against Milwaukee. Anne was there too.
Before Jessica threw out the ceremonial first pitch, she manicured the mound, just as her father had done. The gesture did not recreate 1976. It did something more meaningful. It showed that the ritual had outlived the injury, the retirement, and the years. A movement that once belonged to one unusual rookie had become part of a family's way of remembering him. That is why Mark Fidrych's career remains larger than its length. He was a national celebrity, but the celebrity came from a real baseball achievement. He was a one-season sensation, but the season was one of the best pitching performances in the American League. And he was an unfinished player, not because the promise was imaginary,
but because a torn rotator cuff went undiagnosed while he was still trying to pitch. The Bird did not get to find out whether 1976 was the beginning of a long career or the peak of a short one. Baseball gave him one unforgettable summer. His arm gave him only a few more seasons. But the people who watched him, played with him, raised a family with him, and saw him return to the mound in their memories kept the story alive. Mark Fidrych's career ended before his potential had been measured. His place in baseball did not.